All right, this is video solubility part 2. Okay, if you have not watched video 1 and done the experiment, you need to stop this. You need to go to video 1 solubility and do the experiment because I'm about to show you the results. So you want to make sure that you did the experiment first. Again, if you have not tested your solubility and done the experiment, I need you to do that. So hit pause here, go to video 1. All right, so let's take a look at our results. Okay, cup number 1, it was the salt, which I wasn't supposed to have told you what was going to be in there quite yet. So I kind of skipped over, which is kind of hard when you're at home to do this where you don't know what the substances are because you have to get the different substances. So I was supposed to give you a white powder, white grains, not tell you what it is, and then you're supposed to write down observations, which the first one was the salt. Okay, so important physical properties to note is that salt is a solid, color is a physical property, and that it is small is also a physical property, and it didn't have a smell. So odor is also a property. Okay, and then oil, it has the physical property of a liquid. It is yellow, and it might, depending on what kind of oil you're using, it might have an odor. And then sand, it also has the physical property of a solid. It is brown, and it has different sized particles. So some of the particles are very small, and some are not. So you would want to finish writing down the properties of each substance before you mixed it. What did these substances look like before you mixed them? So I should have talked about that prior to actually doing the experiment. All right, so like we said, number 1, after you stirred it for a minute with the salt, okay, and when I carefully observe, I do not see the individual particles like how salt looks when it's in the salt shaker. See here, I can see the individual particles. So the salt particles, they have evenly mixed. So for my results, I would put that the salt, it did dissolve, and you should have written down 3 observations. So it did dissolve, it evenly mixed, but I noticed that the water, it looks kind of cloudy, okay? And I also noticed that if I took a drink out of it, I would definitely taste the salt. So it still has its physical property of taste. And that's all I have for that one. All right, so number 2 was the oil. So even after I stirred my oil for a minute, oil is less dense. It does not evenly mix with the water. It does not evenly mix. Okay, so I see that the oil is floating on top. Okay, and I know that it has the property, oil is less dense. So it's really important to write down our properties that we have already learned about the substances. All right, next we had the sand and water. Okay, after I stirred for a minute, the sand did not dissolve. Very important. Think about if you're in a lake or in the ocean. Where's all the dirt? Well, it's more dense. It sank down to the bottom. Okay, so it did not dissolve. It is more dense, sank down to the bottom. Okay, so it kept its property of being a solid. Did not evenly mix. Kept its color too. Kept its color. All right. So cup number 4, here I have the pepper. Okay, the pepper did not evenly mix. I see all those grains down there on the bottom. There's a few on top, but the majority of the pepper did sink down to the bottom. So for my pepper, I would check did not mix. Most of the pepper is more dense. It sank. Okay. Kept its color. Okay. Some of the color did kind of mix, but the majority of it, like I said, the majority of the pepper is sank down to the bottom. Okay. Number 5, the sugar. I mean, look at that. After a minute of mixing, I do not see any sugar grains at all. All right, so the sugar, it dissolved. Yes, it did. And my cup, it is clear. I don't see those sugar grains at all, but guess what? I know that if I took a big old drink of it, I would taste that the water is sweet. Just like how I like my sweet tea, or even in my coffee, I like a little sugar. I like to taste the sweetness. Okay, cup number 6. All right, so we have tea. So here is the tea. So they're like crushed up leaves. Okay, now tea is kind of a tricky one because if I opened up the bag with the crushed up leaves, guess what? The leaves are not going to dissolve. I would have the leaves floating on the top. Some would sink down to the bottom, so they would not dissolve. But if you're looking at tea like this, it is evenly mixed. So tea is kind of tricky. So you're going to have to think about how are they asking you the question about the tea. Okay, most of the time, if you're getting asked about tea or you're getting asked about coffee, they're asking you once it has already been made. So they're asking you about it just like this, and you can see that it did evenly mix. If they ask you just about the tea leaves are not going to dissolve. So this one is kind of tricky. So we're going to put, for this one, for tea, I'm going to kind of put both, all right? Both. And so I want you to put think, okay? This means that you're going to have to think about, are they asking you about what is just in the cup after it's made? Because if they're asking you what's just in the cup after the tea is made, and you can tell that looking at it, it is evenly mixed, then yes, it would be dissolved, okay? Because when I drink tea and it's already been made, it's evenly mixed, it is dissolved, okay? If they ask you about, those tea leaves, the leaves are not gonna dissolve. So if they're asking you about the leaves, that's how we make tea, the leaves will not dissolve. So that one it's a tricky one. So that one you have to kind of just do some thinking, and you have to think about, how are they asking me this question? Okay? So you might even want to draw yourself a little picture, how in one, it does look evenly mixed. It looks mixed, so I would say it's soluble. But then the actual leaves do not dissolve, and that's what tea is made from. Leaves do not dissolve. Okay. So we'll practice. There are some questions that we can practice. That there are some questions with tea, and we can practice with those. So we will attack those. All right. So I also said you could do chocolate syrup. Okay. Once I have stirred my chocolate syrup for a minute, okay, the chocolate, it has evenly mixed. Okay. So for chocolate, I would come down here if you guys need to. And yes, the chocolate, it dissolved. Okay, it dissolved. And yes, I can still see the chocolate. It does not have to be clear to dissolve. Okay, if it evenly mixed, it is soluble. So yes, the chocolate, it is soluble. It did evenly mix. I observed that my water is brown. Okay, yes, it would taste like chocolate. I'm gonna abbreviate because I'm having a hard time writing on the bottom of my paper. So those are some properties when I mixed the chocolate with the water. So it did dissolve, it evenly mixed. Okay, so I want you guys to know things don't have to be clear for them to evenly mix. Okay, that's why I said with the tea, once it's made, that it is evenly mixed, even though I can still see it. All right, so we went through the process of the scientific method. So we had our question, does it dissolve? So once I analyze my data, yes, the salt dissolved. Yes, the sugar dissolved. Yes, the chocolate syrup dissolved. And we could say yes, once the tea has been made, that what's in the cup there, it evenly mixed. But no, we know that the tea leaves do not dissolve. Okay? So then we have to think about, we did our question, we made our hypothesis. So now let's compare. How do our results compare with your hypothesis? Okay? It's important to note, guys, if your hypothesis is wrong, that's fine, because that's just a prediction. But now that you've done the test, okay, you've learned the results. So it's perfectly fine if what we predict is not actually the results, because that's part of our learning. We went through the procedure. We recorded our results. So now we're going to do the last part of the scientific method. Everybody along the side of your paper, write conclusion. Conclusion. So this is what we have learned. Okay? It says, how did your predictions compare with the actual results? So when you're thinking about what you learned, your conclusion, you are thinking about your hypothesis as compared to what really happened. So I want you to write a complete sentence about what you learned and about your results and your hypothesis in a complete sentence, which actually it should probably take 2 or 3 complete sentences. Okay. So today we found out what things were soluble, that have the solubility physical property.